where do you see coded institutionalized racism in Idaho politics? I'm sort of thinking about the Stand Your Ground law that just passed, for example.
Yeah, I've been out here in the Northwest for 8 years, and Western Washington seems very different to me than Eastern Washington and Idaho, right? In terms of politics. This is one of the problems with sort of addressing these kinds of structurally racist issues, right? Is that many of them, when you talk about stand your ground, right? There's no sort of official. It's not as explicit as what these Confederate drafters, secession drafters, were saying about their position, but the impacts of those kinds of laws certainly are disproportionately impact minorities, right? Those kinds of laws, I'm sure we can think of others that are kind of stripped of any kind of race-specific language, are kind of difficult ones to deal with, right? Because they do what a lot of this kind of lost cause stuff does, which is to kind of erase the kind of foundations of the laws themselves, right? Or at least the impacts of the laws themselves. So move race from that discussion. Right? In theory, anyone can stand their ground. In theory, right? So there was another. Yeah.
Yeah, it's as part of this discussion about Civil War statues. I've heard that I've been to several battlefields,
Yeah.
and there's monuments for both North
Sure.
and South. And I've heard that they're saying that those are kind of be off limits. And why do you think that they want to keep those kind of off limits as compared to
In terms of removal?
well, removal or even change the location or
Right.
whatever that option is. And so I kind of thought that was interesting, but it was interesting in your perspective.
I guess my perspective is, as a Southerner who despises sort of open displays of racism,
Mm-hmm.
I fall into this sort of, well, something needs to happen with a lot of these monuments. But as an historian, right, and historians are charged with preserving
Mm-hmm.
and interpreting the past, right? I certainly think that some fresh interpretation is in order at many of these sites. I'm less familiar with the ones on battlefields. I'm not a kind of military history buff. So I couldn't speak to any specifics, like good examples of, strong, good, kind of well-rounded interpretation on the battlefields.
Right.
But the monuments that stand in most southern towns and cities, monuments to the Confederacy, that is, and Stone Mountain is a good example of this. There's really very little context in which those monuments were first erected, right? They're sort of these benign homages to, again, a kind of noble defeat.
Right.
And lost in that is the politics of race, right, in which those monuments went up. They didn't all go up in 1865, right? They went up, they've gone up, right, for the 100 years and plus since then. So, where was I going with that?
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
So, I come from a little bit different perspective because historical memory is really what I'm most interested in, and I have studied quite a bit about historical monuments. And I think it's a slippery slope argument to say, well, if we start taking down this hideous statue, then we're just going to have to erase every battlefield that's ever been commemorated, because you're talking about pretty different things there. You're talking about a commemoration at a battlefield like Chickamauga or Gettysburg or something, where it's a bunch of obelisks that say this blank moved here at 9 in the morning, and then they went here at 10 in the morning. I mean, if you've been to any of these battlefields, it's amazing the amount of marble they threw out there.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
It's quite different than when you are talking about a place that's supposed to be the people's house, and you are a Georgia resident, and you have to walk by a statue to go into the people's house. It's a political statement. It was put there specifically to intimidate minorities. And I think it is a way for people to say, well, if you take down one, where are you gonna stop? And that's kind of willful ignorance in my mind. That is choosing to decide that we have to save them all because heaven forbid we lose any of them.
And I think there's plenty of room for reinterpretation. I mean, a lot of these monuments exist in, at least in what are now major cities in the South, that also have massive slave markets, that there's very little, if any, commemoration of those. And so if we want to leave up monuments to the Confederacy, let's expand the interpretation and work that other side of the Confederacy.
If you want to see a good example, Gettysburg just redid their visitor center within the last couple of years, and that's a national parks site, so they've got some issues. They are kind of working within a framework, but they've done a nice job of moving beyond this was the gun that was used sort of mentality, and that's how a lot of these Civil War battlefields are. It strips out the human contact of the battle entirely, and it's all about the technology, it's all about the uniforms.
The maneuvers.
I had somebody tell me they went to work, they were the chief interpreter at Andersonville, which was a giant POW camp in Georgia, and they were doing reenactments. People were doing live reenactments without any Union soldiers. It was just Confederate guards reenacting what it would have been like to be Confederate guards. Without
Nobody
any
wanted to
presence.
wear the Union.
Nobody wanted to be a Union soldier starving to death inside of Andersonville. So it was, I mean, there are a lot of these things where it's like, this glory,
Yeah.
it was glorious to lose, and that's the lost cause.
Well, and I think it's kind of interesting that there's not just Confederate monuments on these battlefields, that both north and south. And so,
Right.
and I think it talks about, some of those things, and there, that's, someone can say, the wisdom of the Pickett's last charge, but it's part of you're right, it's part of that battle. I think it just kind of talks about that, and where it started and how it worked and that sort of thing. So, and I enjoy military battlefields because I enjoy military history. So,
It's amazing how much.
Yeah. So
Tom?
I'm sorry. So yeah.
I very rarely speak up at events like this. However, this kind of hits home a little. I retired from the Army. During my 20 years in the Army, I served three tours in Germany. I served in Munich, Nuremberg, and Stuttgart.
Yeah.
Altogether 11 years. Not once, not for 1 second ever, did I see the Nazi flag on public display.
Right.
However, if you go to a museum during a certain night frame, you see it all over the place.
Sure.
It's a reflection on their history. They're not necessarily proud of it.
Right.
They do it.
Yeah.
That to me is the way they should handle this Confederate routine.
Move them into museums.
Exactly.
Yeah. And sure, that's one way to do it. The other way is what I said before, is to provide the full context into which those monuments went up, right? I mean, they're not going to move Stone Mountain, right? But the park could reinterpret that history in radically different ways than they have. As I said, the stuff on the Klan is virtually absent from their website. I'm not up to date on, all the physical markers around the park, but I would imagine they're few and far between, I think. And they still fly the Confederate flag at the park.
So who is running that park? Is that a Georgia?
Yeah, it's the state of Georgia.
Park? So the
Yeah.
state of Georgia is running that park.
Yeah.
So-
I don't think you'd see a Confederate flag at a national.
So getting back to your thing, I think one of the differences is if it's in front of a courthouse or something major that people go to get justice or go to their job, they don't have a choice of that statue being there. If I'm interested in military history and want to go to a cemetery or to a site, that is my choice. I can select to go there or not to go there.
Right.
If it's me going into the courthouse or me going to work, that's not my choice. It's
Yeah.
something I have to do. And if I have to go by the statute that is objectionable to me, then I don't think I should have to do that.
So one more question.
But if Stone Mountain, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, one more.
If Stone Mountain is a state park, then people's taxes,
Sure,
including African Americans.
That's right.
Are paying for the upkeep.
that's right.
Then that comes down to a local decision.
Mhm.
Well, can we all thank?